Baik, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Semangat pagi, 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 pagi. Baik, sahabat mahasiswa, kita bertemu kembali di bincang atau belajar bareng seputar jaringan komputer dan komunikasi data. Kita masuk di pertemuan selanjutnya, di pertemuan pekan ketiga dan keempat, untuk membahas atau belajar bareng seputar OSI Layer. Oke, di sub pokok bahasan kita di OSI Layer kali ini, kita akan belajar tentang apa itu protokol jaringan atau network protocol. Kemudian kita akan belajar seputar Open System Interconnection atau OSI Layer. Kemudian yang berikutnya kita akan belajar mulai dari layer 1 terkait dengan fisikal, layer 2 data link, layer 3 network, layer 4 transport, layer 5 session, layer 6 presentation, dan layer 7 application. Di materi kedua ini OSI Layer di part yang pertama. Sebelum kita masuk ke materi, mari kita lihat video terkait dengan pengenalan dasar seputar OSI Layer. Oke, sembari saya siapkan untuk video OSI Layer-nya. Oke, kita lihat video OSI Layer-nya, teman-teman mahasiswa sekalian.
Hello, this is IT. Have you tried turning it off and on again?
No, I'm just having a problem with the
Ya,
server.
jadi di OSI Layer ini diilustrasikan tentang bagaimana proses pengiriman surat dari pengirim ke penerima. Jadi ibaratnya OSI Layer untuk komunikasi data suatu di sistem jaringan komputer.
All devices on the network have network hardware and software. They need to speak a common language. That is, one host needs to communicate in a way that another host can understand. These languages are called protocols.
Oke, ini diilustrasikan tentang seorang yang akan mengirim jaringan komputer. Kita simak sembari
But trying to track how they all interact can get complicated. And that's why we have network models. They help us to understand how everything fits together.
Oke, jadi ini diilustrasikan teman-teman ya. Ibaratnya kita mengirim data di jaringan komputer atau komputer network. Ini kalau di dunia kehidupan kita sehari-hari, bagaimana data itu diilustrasikan dengan surat ya. Nah, suratnya, ini letter surat. Kemudian dikemas, di packaging, selanjutnya dikirimkan ke alamat, kemudian di stempel, kemudian dikirimkan ke kantor pos ya, kemudian dikirim melalui media transportasi untuk menuju tujuannya ya, kemudian di-deliver. Ini ilustrasi terkait dengan OSI Layer. Di letter atau surat tadi yang kita kemas, kemudian kita taruh dalam amplop atau box, kemudian dialamatkan ke alamat lokal atau internasional, kemudian kita stempel, kemudian dikirim ke kantor office, baik itu melalui kantor pos box, pick up, ataupun back messenger. Transportasinya bisa berupa truk, plane, kereta, kemudian kapal ya, atau kombinasi.
We don't need to know any specific details to start with, but the
Ya,
model
jadi
can help
ini
us to understand the
ilustrasi
network.
dari konsep OSI Layer ya, sahabat
The
teman-teman
OSI
semuanya.
model can help us to understand the network.
Nah,
It
bagaimana
breaks the
dengan
network up into
memahaminya di
7
OSI
layers.
Layer?
These layers are physical, data link, network, transport, session,
Ya. Jadi di OSI
presentation,
Layer
and
ada 7
application.
layer, teman-teman. Physical,
And if that's
data
a bit
link,
tricky to remember,
network,
think of this mnemonic. Please
transportation,
do not throw sausage pizza
session,
away.
presentation, hingga
I know it's a bit
application.
silly, but it helps us to
Nah, ini
remember
kalau
the layers
disingkat
and their order.
dengan
Notice that these are all
PDNTSPA
generic
supaya
layers.
teman-teman mudah
There's no
menghafalnya.
Ethernet layer or email layer. The OSI model is not about specific technologies, but rather how they fit into the network stack. Imagine that we have an application on one host that needs to send data to an application
Oke.
on another host.
Nah, ini dari
Let's now
layer
see how this
ke-7
data
ada layer
moves through the OSI
application,
model.
presentation, session,
The data,
transport,
as the
network, data
application
link, dan
sees it,
physical.
starts at the application layer. This is where network APIs and apps that access the network live. For example, this includes FTP and web browsing. The data needs to be in a format that can be easily understood. That's what the presentation layer is for. Anything related to data formats lives here.
Oke, ini
Such as
teman-teman
image and video
bisa
files.
lihat nanti di
The
video
session layer
lengkapnya
tracks
ya di
application processes. This
channel
includes remote
network
procedure calls and
direction.
service
Ini cukup
requests.
bagus channelnya untuk
Think of
teman-teman
this layer
belajar
as building a session between a
seputar
local
komputer
application
network.
and a remote one. You can probably see that the session, presentation, and application layers work with very large pieces of information.
Kembali ke
But that doesn't
OSI
work well
Layer
for
di
lower
ilustrasi
layers.
video tadi
For
dibagi
instance,
menjadi dua,
what if the
teman-teman.
data you're transferring is
Ada
very
upper
large?
layer dan lower layer.
Maybe this doesn't seem like a problem on the surface, but what happens if you get right to the end of the transfer and the connection is interrupted? You would have to start the whole transfer again. Also, any other application that wants to use the
Ini
network would have to
teman-teman
wait
sekali
until
lagi
its
bisa
transfer is
lihat
complete.
di network
Fortunately, there's a way
direction.
around this. When the data reaches the transport layer, it is
Nah, dari
broken
upper
into
layer
manageable
nanti
chunks. Now, if
menuju
there's
lower
only
layer,
limited
begitu
data,
sebaliknya
only
ya.
one chunk of data needs
Bagaimana
to be written, not the
konsep
entire
komunikasi
file.
data.
Also, apps can take turns at sending
Jadi
chunks of
kita
data,
amati dulu
rather
sebelum
than
nanti
one
saya
app
bahas
hogging the
di
host's
video
resources.
part 2
This
untuk
is called
materi kedua
multiplexing.
tentang OSI Layer.
Sometimes we need to add more information. Adding the destination address is an example of this. Any information we add to the front of our data is called a header. Any information we add to the back is called a trailer. As you can see, each piece of data gets bigger and bigger as it moves through the network stack. Eventually, the data reaches the physical layer, where it is transmitted
Oke,
over
jadi ini
cable or wireless to
di
a remote
video
host.
diilustrasikan atau
The
dijelaskan
remote host
bagaimana
receives the
terjadinya
data at the
proses
physical layer.
atau
The process
konsep
is then
komunikasi
reversed.
data nih
The data
teman-teman.
flows back up through the layers.
Dari upper layer ke lower layer, kemudian
Each
dari
layer
lower
does its
layer
job,
dikirimkan
removing
kembali
headers
ke
and trailers and
upper layer.
encoding the data until it is in a form that the application can understand. Can you see here that each layer will only communicate with the layer above and the layer below? Each layer has its own job to do and doesn't get involved with
Setiap
other layers
lapisan punya
other than
tugas dan
pass and
fungsinya
receive
masing-masing
data.
teman-teman ya.
You can probably see how this makes it easy to combine different protocols to achieve different tasks. Now, I'm going to pose you a scenario. You're working in the network team and users are complaining that a new high bandwidth application is causing the network to slow down. Which layer do you think needs to be addressed?
Bagaimana layer bisa dialamatkan ya?
Well, I'm going to leave that for you to think about. I'll put the answer on the website if you're curious. We'll now take a closer look at what each layer does. Afterward, we'll run through an example of how this might work.
Ini dari layer yang paling atas, layer application ke layer presentation.
This starts with the application layer. This is not strictly the application itself, but rather it's how the application accesses the network. Some examples of this include web browsing, accessing emails, and transferring files. It also includes management sessions like SSH, Telnet, and RDP. The application may contain a lot of data. This data may not always make sense to the rest of the network, so the presentation layer helps by converting it if needed. This conversion may also include services like encryption and compression. File formats also live here, including images and video files. An application may need to talk to several other endpoints, so it is important to track where these conversations are occurring. Each of these conversations is called a
Oke, nanti
session.
teman-teman bisa sekali
It's
lagi
surprising that this is handled at the
tonton
session layer.
videonya secara utuh
Traffic you
di
would see
Network
here
Direction.
includes
Ini saya
requests to
coba
network
kasih
services.
channel satu lagi
You may have
yang
heard of
cukup
session.
bagus seputar OSI Layer maupun komputer network yang lain ya.
In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the OSI
Kita
model.
belajar seputar OSI model.
So, what is the OSI model?
Apa itu OSI model? Nah, ini dijelaskan di
The
sini.
model is a theoretical stack of 7 layers that can be used as a
Ada 7
reference to
layer
help
seperti yang
understand
sudah
how
dijelaskan
networks
di
operate.
video sebelumnya.
The model was introduced to standardize networks in a way that allowed multi-vendor systems. Prior to this, you would only be able to have a one-vendor network because the devices from one vendor couldn't communicate with others. It's worth noting at this point that
Di
we
OSI
don't
layer ini
actually
identik
use
dengan
the
7
OSI
layer
model.
di mana menjadi
We use
standar
something called the
komunikasi
TCP
dalam
IP
suatu
model.
sistem jaringan
Concepts are
komputer
exactly the
atau
same,
komputer network.
the layers are slightly different. So if we don't use the OSI model, why would we bother learning it? Well, that's because it's still referenced a lot when troubleshooting or describing network operations. Let's take a look at the layers starting from the bottom up. Layer 1 is the
Ini
physical
di
layer.
layer pertama
The
teman-teman
physical layer is the
ada
lowest layer of the OSI model.
kabel, network
Its
interface
key
card, dan hub.
responsibility is to
Nanti kita
carry
akan
the data
pelajari
across physical
di
hardware
video
such as
materi selanjutnya
locates.
khusus bagian
Layer 2
praktikum ya
is
di
the
layer
data
1.
link layer.
Nanti silakan
At this layer, the
disimak.
physical addresses
Nah,
are
ini di
added to
layer
the
2
data. This
ada
is
layer data link,
source
ada MAC
and
address dan
destination
switch.
MAC addresses. Switches are located at this layer. The network layer handles IP
Kemudian di
addressing
layer
and
3
connection.
ada IP
At this
address
stage
dan
of the
router.
OSI model, the source and destination IP address are added. Routers operate on this layer. Layer 4, the transport. The transport layer of the OSI model
Oke,
adds
di
the
layer 4
transport
ada
protocols
TCP,
such
UDP,
as
dan port
TCP
number.
and UDP.
Ini
TCP, for
cukup
example, is
informatif.
used for error
Ini
handling
teman-teman
and
bisa
sequencing to
lihat
ensure
di
no
channelnya.
data is lost.
Kalau tadi di
This layer
Network
also
Direction,
adds
ini di
the
chat
source
plus. Ini
and
juga cukup
destination
recommended
numbers.
buat teman-teman belajar
Layer 5,
putar
session.
komputer network
This
ya.
layer is responsible for
Oke,
establishing and
kembali ke
terminating
video.
connections between devices. Layer 6, presentation. This layer formats the data in a way the receiving application can
Kita
understand
masuk
it.
di layer
This
tadi
layer is
3 ada
also
IP
able
address
to
dan router.
encrypt and
Di layer
decrypt
4
data if
ada
needed.
transport, TCP, UDP,
Layer
dan
7,
number. Nah, layer
application.
5 session,
This layer is where the
start dan
application
stop
and
session.
user
Layer
communicates.
6 ini ada format data
Application-specific
atau encryption,
protocols
dan
are
layer
used here,
7
such as
application.
SMTP if you're sending an email, for example. A really good way to remember these layers is simply all people seem to need data processing. APS
Jadi sekali lagi biar teman-teman gampang menghafalnya PDNTSPA ya.
So to fully understand how this model works, you need to see a
Ini bagaimana
real-world example.
terjadinya komunikasi
Let's say
data
you
nih
send an
teman.
email. The data travels
Di
through the
layer.
OSI model, adding and processing data on each layer. Now this process is called encapsulation. Step 1, the application layer. Outlook creates the data, the email you wrote,
Jadi
email
ini
addresses,
proses komunikasi
etc.,
data teman-teman.
etc., and gets ready to send it using
Layer application.
SMTP, which is the simple
Jelaskan di
mail
part
transfer
selanjutnya
protocol.
lebih gamblang ya.
Step 2, presentation layer. The data is formatted in a way the receiving device will understand. In this example, probably ASCII. This layer could also encrypt the data if needed. Step 3, session layer. A session with receiving mail server is started. Step 4, transport. This is where it decides to use TCP or UDP. In this case, we'll use TCP to make sure every packet gets delivered. Also, the source and destination URL is added to the data.
Teman-teman bisa nyalakan
Step 5,
subtitlenya kalau
network.
mau lebih
The
mudah.
IP address of the mail server is added as the destination, and the source IP address is also added to the data. Step 6, data link. The MAC address of the router and the source MAC address of the host is added to the data. Step 7, physical. The data is sent out on the network using Ethernet. So when the data reaches the other side, the receiving device will process the data in the same way but in reverse, starting from the bottom up. Okay, so that's the OSI model.
Oke, dengan kita tahu OSI layer ini kita bisa melakukan troubleshooting ketika ada gangguan di jaringan komputer, teman-teman ya.
Sounds like a layer 3 issue. When you hear that, that's people referring to this model.
Oke, itu nanti teman-teman bisa lihat di channelnya Chatboss ya. Ini ada beberapa channel yang recommended untuk teman-teman pelajari seputar komputer network. Oke, gitu di part 1 ini untuk materi yang kedua. Nanti kita sambung di part kedua untuk materi kedua OSI Layer. Sampai jumpa.